Hey everyone, I'm Langdon Palmer, and this podcast is an addendum to the message given on C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength, at Leverington Presbyterian Church on March 14th, 2021. There were so many amazing connections between Lewis's book and George Orwell's fantasy 1984 and the actual philosophies and methods used by Marxists both in the time both books were written and in our own cultural moment, that I thought it was really worth doing this additional message on that connection. I'm calling it Hegemony equals Counterhegemony equals evil, for reasons I hope will become clear as we go along. And this message is not to support any kind of conspiracy theory. Rather, it is an attempt to make the average citizen aware of the stated goals. Let me say that again. The stated goals and procedures of those who desire to destroy our society because they think it's irredeemable. And therefore they think the only option is to tear it all down and start all over again towards the utopia that exists only in their minds. The actual history of the last 100 years implies that the only natural result of this political philosophy getting its way is far more suffering and human misery and abuse of the most vulnerable than is happening now under our capitalist system, as imperfect as it is. By more, I don't mean 10% more, I mean something more like 1,000% more. This stuff could really matter to people you care about deeply, and especially future generations. So these two books, Lewis's Hideous Strength and Orwell's 1984, are not just entertaining fiction. They actually help us feel the results of these political philosophies. So, let's dig in. And what I'm going to do is look at 4 quotes from Orwell's 1984 that are a sequence of ideas that actually end up leading to the very things we see at work today. And this movement is paralleled in the story of That Hideous Strength as Lewis's book unfolds. So here's the first quote from George Orwell's 1984. It says, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever." You see, ideas about controlling the public for their own good, passing restrictive laws in order to create a glorious future, re-educating the people and punishing them for non-compliance with your all-knowing, omniscient utopia vision always ends up the same way, whether the control comes from progressives or conservatives, right-wing or left-wing. Either way, if you want a picture of the future they will give us, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. In other words, it leads to the extermination of human freedom, liberty, creativity, and joy. You become a unit of production in the machine. It's true, everyone has equal rights and equal income, which means everyone is poor and everyone has no rights. And always there is the elite few at the top who live in luxury as they control the masses with fear and force and spying on neighbors and social shaming. In other words, the death of the idea of the individual. A society where individuals don't matter, all that matters is the state. Think about the Soviet Union. Think about China. Okay, well, how do you accomplish this? How do you take over a free society and corrupt it into a totalitarian state? Here comes Orwell's second quote from 1984. "If thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." Okay, so let me translate. The first step is you start with language. If you want to corrupt the thinking of the masses so they will believe the lies you are telling them, the first thing you need to do is change the meaning of words. So you intentionally think about how to corrupt the language and what words mean, knowing that will eventually corrupt the way the masses think about things. In his own dystopian fantasy, Orwell has the corrupt government come out with the following slogans: "War is peace," Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Talk about corrupting a language. They make words mean the exact opposite of what they mean. Can you think of words in our cultural moment that now mean something totally different than they meant 10 years ago? And I don't mean the way words change naturally. I don't mean the way words change through the usual organic shift that develops naturally out of how people use words in culture. In other words, it arises to a new meaning through use. No, but by activists intentionally injecting new meanings of their own making into the culture on purpose with an agenda, and then demanding that we accept those meanings. For example, in our moment, think about the word hate. The word hate used to mean the condition where you had a truly nasty, bigoted, despising stance towards some person or some group. It was a real state of the human heart. You felt it. Now people say that if you disagree with them on some public policy issue, that means you hate. In other words, the word no longer has anything to do with what you actually feel or actually think or actually do. And when you get that label now, it has the same impact as being labeled a communist or a red in the late 50s. You're canceled. Here's another example. Instead of defending free speech, we hear people saying that speech is violence, and so that's bad. But then they go on to say that violence is actually an expression of speech, so that makes violence okay. If you feel crazy in our cultural moment with the way words are being used, there's a reason. Okay, well, how do you get to the point where you have the power to corrupt language this way? Orwell goes on, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So, let me translate that. If you are in control now, you can rewrite history. You can rewrite the past to make it fit your narrative. Well, how do you do that? How do you get that kind of power? You control the organs of the national narrative. That means you control where the stories are made. You control which stories get told, and you control how they are told. Well, how do you do that? You control the storytellers, and what are they? They are the news outlets, the entertainment industry, and the academy. These are the three primary places that large cultural national narratives emerge from. Once you can control those, you can rewrite history. And once you rewrite history, it controls the way people think about themselves and their history. And once you do that, you control the future, because you've created what look like legitimate excuses based on the past for why it is necessary to usher in your new policies and restrictions and punishments for nonconformance. In that hideous strength, this subversive group is housed in a university and is an organization, the NICE. The NICE. Sounds nice. But it stands for the National Institute of the Coordinated Experiments. And so what they do is they use science, scary quotes, as a cover for their true agenda, which is to overthrow the existing social order. In the book, Mark comes to realize that the only way he can truly advance his career at the school is to get into the inner circle. But then he finds out the inner circle are all involved in the NICE. And so he joins the NICE. They assign him a job in the propaganda department. In one scene, a leader is trying to explain to the inexperienced Mark Stockton how to do propaganda well. Mark wonders which political side they should support. They reply, "Don't you understand anything? It's absolutely essential to keep a fierce left and to keep a fierce right, both of them on their toes and each terrified of the other. That's how we get our things done." But Mark wonders, how in the world are we going to deceive the smart people? You know, the educated people with all their degrees who love theories and research and being hip and think of themselves as oh so wise and ahead of their time. They reply, "Why, you fool! It's the educated reader who's the easiest to deceive. All our difficulty comes with the others. When did you meet a workman who believes the newspapers? He takes it for granted that they're all propaganda, and he skips the leading articles. He buys his newspaper for the football results and those little paragraphs about girls falling out of windows and corpses found in Philadelphia apartments. He is our problem. We have to recondition him. But the educated public? Oh no, the people who read the highbrow weeklies, they don't need reconditioning. They're all right ready. They'll believe anything." Now remember, C.S. Lewis was a first-rate scholar and one of the world's experts in his field of medieval literature. He taught at both Oxford and Cambridge for many years, so he is writing about his own people here. Now, is he and Orwell and am I going overboard? Does this all sound so far-fetched like conspiracy theories? This is Antonio Gramsci. I think that's how you say it. He was an Italian Marxist, writing just before the publication of that Hideous Strength. And he used a fancy word, hegemony, to describe the way the ruling class in capitalist countries maintained their power and control and wealth. He claimed they did it by justifying the social, political, and economic status quo. And they justified it as natural, inevitable, and beneficial to every social class, rather than what it really was, an artificial social construct, beneficial solely to the ruling class. Hegemony is the domination of a culturally diverse society, like the U.S., by the ruling class, which rules by manipulating the culture of that society, manipulating the beliefs, explanations, perceptions, values, and morality so that the imposed ruling class worldview becomes accepted as the cultural norm, which then justifies the social, political, and economic status quo as natural and inevitable, perpetual, and beneficial for every social class, when it really isn't. Now, in that understanding, I agree that there are some important critiques of old school, unregulated, cutthroat capitalist society. I mean, there is something there that needs to be wrestled with in his argument, and it should be taken seriously. But what is the Marxist solution? He's claiming this model, and he's claiming it's true without actually proving it's true. But assuming it's true for a moment, what is the Marxist solution? Why, counter-hegemony, which turns out to be hegemony all over again. It's just that now it's the Marxists who are the elite ones, sitting in the thrones of power, telling lies to the peasants about why they should love their lives just the way they are. Again, think about actual history and what we've seen in the Soviet Union and in China. And you see, if he has some legitimate claims about how capitalism works, there's a whole lot more to this. The reality is much more complicated than this simple model he's giving. For example, the vast majority of capitalists are unaware that this is happening and are taking no intentional acts to support hegemony, even if their selfishness and self-centeredness does lead to a reality that in some small fraction of transactions does lead to these problems. In other words, let's assume it's actually true for a minute. Even if it was true, 99.99% of these people at the top are not thinking, hey, what I want to do is usher in hegemony. They're just being selfish, normal human beings. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying it's not an intentional plan. But on the other hand, Marxists and their postmodern descendants are clearly seeing that these are the steps to gain power and are intentionally trying to make them happen. In other words, they are trying to create their own hegemony on purpose, with the goal that their counter-hegemony would lead to a 100% new narrative. It's not like it would influence it a little bit. They need it to completely influence what is going on. Well, to what end? To usher in a new utopia where they, in their infinite wisdom, put themselves in the very positions of the elites they critique. But listen, that's okay. You don't have to worry about that because unlike the previous elites, they're really nice. Oh, they're really nice and they can always be trusted. No, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and there is no greater power than controlling the official narrative of our country's origins and desired future. Listen to how Antonio Gramsci suggests you should overthrow a free society like the U.S. You intentionally confront and oppose the existing status quo and its legitimacy in every sphere of life: politics, history, media, and music. You do this as the groundwork, the preparation for political change, aimed at the deconstruction of the system in general, but especially removing the power of the middle class and small business owners. You see, in a free society, the middle class is always the problem. They have enough power and resources to oppose tyranny. The poor don't, and the rich can just move to another country. So you have to break the back of the middle class if you want to shape society into your own image. So he suggests 2 steps. This is his theory of what you do and how you do it. First, you do the war of position, and next, the war of movement. And notice he uses the word war. In a war of position, you use persuasion or propaganda to increase the number of people who share your view, who buy into your narrative. In the second phase, in the war of movement, you wait until you have a large enough section of the population convinced that you can overthrow, and then you overthrow, using any force necessary to overthrow the current form of government and power and replace it with your own. Man, if that doesn't send shivers down your spine, I don't know what does. So, does any of this sound a little too familiar? This behind-the-scenes scheming, this intentional corruption of language to the point of driving your average person crazy because the rules keep changing on what words you can use and the right way to use them, and you're never virtuous enough or loyal enough. This controlling of the official narrative to always cast one side as virtuous and the opposing side as evil, opposing progress or opposing patriotism. You see, this is the hideous strength, the demonic force that cares only about its own power and supremacy, even if it is helped along the way by millions of well-meaning followers who actually do care about other people and especially care about the poor and the downtrodden. Once the leaders of such movements are safely in the position of power, all those loyal followers who believed in the dream, their nirvana to come, are no longer needed, except as cogs, as means of production to feed the apparatus of the state. And it all starts with the use of language. In that hideous strength, as the nice begin to use both mobs and police to stir up confusion and violence so that the people are open to anyone who can offer peace, they do realize that the optics have to be handled very carefully in the beginning. And so they want Mark to write a news article about a protest and what happened there before the protest even happens. They say, we want you to write it down to camouflage it. Only for the present, of course. Once things get going, we shan't have to bother about the great heart of the British public. We'll make the great heart what we want it to be. But in the meantime, it does make a difference how you put things. For instance, if it were even whispered that the nice wanted powers to experiment on criminals, you'd have all the old women of both sexes up in arms and yapping about humanity. but call it re-education of the maladjusted, and you'll have them all slobbering with delight that brutal era of retributive punishment has at last come to an end. Or here's another example. It's an odd one. The word experiment is unpopular, but not the word experimental. You mustn't experiment on children. Oh, but offer the dear little kiddies free education in an experimental school attached to the nice, and people will think it's just wonderful. Now, both the left and the right can and have used these horrible approaches. Both conservatives and progressives can be tempted to use these kind of techniques to seize power. You might think one of them is doing it right now. In fact, I think both of them are attempting to do it right now, but one of them has much more of a monopoly on the wheels of the culture in this particular moment. And so, as I've said before, therefore, the far left and the far right are equally evil, but they're not equally dangerous. Whichever one has more the control of the media and the news and entertainment and the academy is more dangerous because they are able to control the narrative. Whichever one has more of a monopoly on the wheels of culture in a given moment is the one we need to pay the most attention to, because they're going to appear the most credible, because they control the narrative. So, how do little people like you and I fight such a huge, powerful, hideous force? I think the first part of this two-part series, entitled That Hideous Strength, a sermon podcast on C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, offers some hope in the scripture we look at there. To watch or listen to the entire Space Trilogy sermon series, go to www.leverington.org and type Space Trilogy into the search bar. Guys, thanks for listening. I hope this has been thought-provoking. I'll see you next time.